This podcast episode was made possible in part with support from Sacred Rights, a project funded by the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation and hosted by Northeastern University. Sacred Rights is a project that supports public scholarship on religion and provides resources and networks for scholars of religion committed to translating the significance of their research to a broader audience. I recommend you learn more about Sacred Rights on their website at sacred-rights.org or find Sacred Rights on Twitter at sacred_rights. Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. And this is a podcast where, since 2017, I discuss all things religion with a variety of fantastic scholars, experts, authors, and educators. On this episode, I got to learn about Majorette dance teams and performance at historically black colleges and universities with Dustin Gavin. Dustin Gavin is a Ph.D. candidate in the departments of Religious Studies and African American Studies at Yale University, and he is a member of the 2023 Carpenter cohort at Sacred Rights. He received his BA in journalism from Howard University and MA in media studies from the New School, and completed his second MA in religion and visual arts at Yale Divinity School and the Institute of Sacred Music. On this conversation, we dive deeply into the world, history, and culture of majorette dance teams in the United States, a topic with an immense online following. After you hear this episode, go watch the performances for yourself if you never have. This is the first and only episode discussing dance on this podcast, and I hope you love it. Please enjoy this conversation with Dustin Gavin, and thank you so much to Sacred Rights. Dustin Gavin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
It's a delight, Dustin, to have you on the show. I'm wondering if you can just spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience out there so they know a bit about who you are and what kind of work you do.
Yeah, so my name is Dustin Gavin. I am a Yale Ph.D. candidate in Religious Studies and African American Studies, currently living in New Orleans, Louisiana, because I wanted to be somewhere warm, as I wrote. It's really important to me to add pleasure to my work, and a part of that is environment. So I'm really happy to be here. It's also only 2 hours from my hometown in Mobile, Alabama. So what brings me to my research is honestly me, my parents, the way in which I grew up, and then kind of coming to learn that a lot of the histories that I was surrounded with aren't really spoken about in the academy, which includes HBCU culture, which is like the topic of my research.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I wanted to be able to talk about something that I knew a lot about, I could find out more about, I wanted to learn more about, and that means something to me. And from my experience and my research, I know that it means something to a lot of other people. So I wanted to be able to talk about these things, and I'm happy to be able to.
Fabulous. Well, Dustin, just as a side note, I was recently in New Orleans in January of 2023 for the first time in my entire life. And what an absolutely incredible environment. We went to so many different shows saw so many bands on like Frenchmen Street, and just walked around and spent time on the riverfront. And what an absolutely incredible place. Are you enjoying your time in New Orleans?
I love New Orleans so much. I imagined that I would like it. And I've been here several times because of its proximity to my hometown. But as an adult living here, the spirit of this space is incredible. The people here are incredible. Such a lively space. As you mentioned, the music.
Yeah.
Frenchmen Street, but even where I live in the 7th Ward, you'll see like these sort of pop-up second lines as I'm walking my dog at night sometimes. Like it's an incredible place to be. It's so inspiring. And it's
amazing.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful. I felt so lucky to be able to go for the first time. Whenever I was telling people there that I was there for the first time, they said, "Oh, it definitely won't be your last." And I can't agree more because we're already thinking about coming back next spring for a return visit.
I bet. It's a beautiful city.
Absolutely. All right. So, Dustin, you sort of alluded a little bit about your backstory and your family and the path that led you to your areas of interest in your profession. I definitely want to know a little bit about your academic path as well. I know you're on the verge of finalizing your PhD at Yale. And then I know you went to Howard and the New School, but just tell me a little bit about these like academic turning points and stepping stones along the way that kind of led you to where you are now.
Sure, sure. I always jokingly say there's been so many different versions of Dustin already in this lifetime.
Yeah.
When I originally went to Howard, I mean, I love science and math. I was originally going to do an engineering degree, civil engineering. And the first year went well, but I was actually really bored with it. And I was like, I need something that's going to be like a bit more, not that it wasn't difficult. I don't know. I felt like I figured it out enough. I figured it out. And so I was like, I want to do something else. I knew I like to write, but I think I was afraid of being a writer. So I was like, oh, I'll do like journalism because that's writing, but it's not the sort of creative nonfiction I think that I imagined in the past. So I went through that and got a degree in journalism with a specialization in advertising, but I also graduated in the recession. So like I had these jobs lined up that just did not work out.
Mm.
Like, literally had jobs rescinded that were offered. And it put me in a place where I just was working in restaurants in DC. But during that time, I just was reading a lot and writing a lot and thinking about my passions, which brought me to the New School, where I decided to study documentary film and just research film form and study film form because I also had a passion for film. And even in my present life within the academy, I do plan to add that sort of artistic angle to my work. I do plan to still dabble and work within elements of documentary. But yeah, at the New School, I was doing that. And after I graduated, I was working in New York in post production for some reality television. And it was fine. Bills were getting paid, but I wasn't doing what I wanted because I wanted to have my own topics and talk about my own things and kind of be the author of the author of the work. And in these spaces, I was doing background work. So I had a friend who was at Yale Divinity School and at the ISM, and he told me about their program. And he's like, I think you should apply at least to give yourself a little bit of a break and to like recalibrate. And once I got to the Institute of Sacred Music at Yale, I met Sally Prami, who's been so instrumental in my journey. When I wrote my first paper for her, she's like, what PhD programs are you applying to? And I was a little bit awestruck. I was like, I don't plan to apply to any PhD programs. I've never considered a PhD. And she was very much like, why not? I think that you would do well. And I was convinced, and I saw like sort of how the PhD program worked because I had literally no idea what a PhD. I knew very little about a PhD before that conversation because I'd never thought to be a person who would get a PhD. And so as I read about it and learned more about the programs and looked through many programs at different schools, I decided I would apply to Yale, and I got in. In my first year with my advisor, after the year, we had a check-in. This is with Catherine Lofton. We had a check-in, and she just asked me very randomly, like, so what do you like to do in your spare time? And I named a couple things, and I was like, oh, I also love to watch these videos. And so I pull out these HBCU videos of majorettes, and I'm just in this moment, unbeknownst to like kind of like not even clearly doing it. I'm kind of just pouring through videos and showing her like, oh, you think that's good? No, look at this one. Oh, and this team, they're known for this. Now, wait. Now, also, there are these guys that do this in the South too. And I'm just kind of like rummaging through my sort of YouTube pages. And she's like, wait, why is this not your dissertation topic? And I was like, wait, this can be my dissertation topic. And it kind of just has blossomed from there. And it's exciting because I don't have a time in my life where I wasn't surrounded by HBCU culture. My parents went to Alabama State University. My older brother went to Jackson State University. We went to games all throughout my life. My parents are a part of Black Greek fraternity life. So I was just surrounded by these things and these ideas that somehow felt and feel sacred, feel special to Black Southern life. This project allows for me to question and probe those things and to think about how Africana religious life lives outside of the church, and that you can get feels, like true feels, from experiencing a majorette move, a drum major march, these songs being played, the community, the way this music and dance brings people together. It feels very special, and it feels worth talking about.
Yeah, I'm picturing you with your advisor too in the office, and what a moment that must have been when the advisor saw you lighting up about something, and then, did that teacher instinct thing where they were like, whoa, you're really passionate about this. And then she like met you where you were in that moment and said, this is what you love. This is what you should pursue. Does it kind of feel like that looking back on it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I remember exactly where I was sitting. I remember the colors. I remember where I was facing. It was because I don't know that I was fearless enough to actually talk about things I wanted to talk about. I played fearless by like talking about things that other people didn't want to talk about, like Kim Kardashian or something like that. I was good at doing those things because other people don't want to talk about that. It's like, oh, I'll take these things up, but they're not things that I actually care about. So to get that opportunity to talk about things that I appreciate, it was a very special moment.
I love that. Okay, so I read the description of your research project. I read some of your work as well. And I liked where your blurb on the Sacred Rise website says that you focus on researching Black performance cultures and Black popular culture in the United States, looking at the overlap and confluence of sacred and profane idioms. And then I also like how it talks about the aesthetics and practices of embodiment within Black Southern communities. And you've already mentioned all of these things, touching on them just a little bit as we've gone through. And then you talked a little bit about Majorette dance, which is something that is brand new to me. And these are the videos that I presume that you were referring to, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is something that, I went down a massive deep dive watching these videos myself. I was reading your work and I was pausing and going in on YouTube and like, searching, like the dancing dolls and, like looking up Alcorn State Golden Girls. And it just was something that just took me into this universe that I was completely ignorant of. And I'm so grateful to you for bringing this to my attention and writing about this, because I got to learn so much just from this one piece that I read. So I have to start off our conversation about the topic, presuming that there are people out there who were like me only mere days ago, who maybe have overlooked this in the world. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to me a little bit about, broadly speaking, what is Majorette dance and maybe the origin of this performance style?
I think that many people are familiar with drum majorettes, which are dancers who twirl batons with the band. Usually women identify people who twirl batons in front of the band. And in 1968, at Alcorn State University, the Golden Girls were presented for the first time. And so that was the first time that any HBCU had a dance squad show up with the band. And at that time, they were kind of like drum majorettes, with the twirling sort of dancers in the field. So this catches wind. And then in 1971, Jackson State University, the Prince and J Sets, they show up on the scene and they're like, actually, let's drop the baton and just dance. That picked up, kind of like slowly and gradually, HBCU marching bands were starting to add women to their shows. And actually in 1972, Ebony Magazine decided to like highlight this moment. And it was actually quite interesting. If you read that article, it's in a January 1972 issue of Ebony Magazine. It's the cover story. And it's interesting because there's this debate about like, should we add these women to the shows? Will they steal the show? Are they a distraction from the show? So it's great to me now that like they've now just become such an integral and important part of this show, and that's no longer an argument. But at the time, and for years after, like the beginning of 1968, there was a lot of argument about like, should these girls be dancing? Anyway, we get to now where Majorette dance is a huge phenomenon, and it's basically a dancing style. It's weird. I hate I mean, in the essay, and I feel like you got an earlier version of it, but in the essay, I'm kind of trying to like distract from an idea of like defining it in the clearest terms, because like the way it's talked about, it's like, oh, it's a style of cabaret and jazz mixed with ballet, mixed with Horton technique, mixed with Martha
Mm-hmm.
Graham. And sure, it employs all those techniques, but part of what I want to do with the work is kind of speak about Majorette dance on its own terms and potentially trace it through Black dance movement history so we can think more critically about what's happening, because it's not just a mix. It may employ a bunch of techniques, but I feel like Majorette dance is also innovating many techniques. They're identifiable. They're identifiable in the movement vocabulary. It's very virtuosic. It's very technical. It can move really slowly and slink and curl the body. It's very sultry sometimes, and other times it's very hard. Um, uh, you may see, I don't think that it's exactly twerking, but like something that's close to twerking may show up in some of the movement styles.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I argue too is like there's so much power and there's so much effective energy released from these movements. If you noticed, I'm sure in some of the videos you're watching, especially if you're watching any video that was titled like the fifth quarter, and the fifth quarter is when the football game is over and the football teams leave the field and the audience members can gather around each band and be in the middle of the field, and they just kind of, the opposing bands play against each other for about an hour or so, uninterrupted, because during the game, the marching band has to abide by the sort of like nature of the game. You have to like play at certain times. They're like actual
Yeah.
rules and guidelines about how a marching band can like play. So the fifth quarter is when the bands get the chance to like dance against each other. So anyway, part of what I also want to explore is like the witness of this, because the reason why I talk about this being some sort of sacred thing is that like you watch people, and I don't have to speak about people, I can talk about myself. When I watch these videos, I feel something. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel something. And I think that religion has to start accounting and trusting what's being felt, and that's enough to like record and think through. If someone's saying they're feeling something and they get something from this that makes them different, that transcends them, I think that's enough for inquiry.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I resonate with that too, because like I grew up and from, middle school, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, I was going to see punk rock bands. And it was the same kind of thing where I would watch something and I would feel it. And I never really, it had this energy that I couldn't ever really classify or label or define within myself, but it just elicited this feeling that was so powerful. So I know exactly what you're saying. I get it completely.
Right. And I think that dance probably has that quality in general. And I think that essentially we need to like, I don't know, I have to think about this more and research it more, but I think we have to think more about what is religion and what religion does and how do
Yeah.
we know when it's happening.
Yeah. So you already mentioned some of the famous troops and teams in Majorette dance. Like, can you give me like an overview of like some of the teams and the troops that you have followed throughout your research in this topic?
Oh yes. So the team that I've always loved since being very young, the Southern University Fabulous Dancing Dolls have always been my favorite team. They're very Southern Belle. You can almost hear like the sort of accent and the twang in the movement.
Mm.
I love them. Alabama State University, Sensational Stingettes, as I mentioned earlier. My parents went to Alabama State University, and so like I've always been proximate to their band, and so I followed them for a very long time. And they're also very dynamic, and they have very like striking, like they kind of like strike and pull back in these really beautiful ways. Yeah, and they're to me they're like they're just a different type of Southern. They're doing a dance of a different type of Southern woman. Like she's not exactly a belle. She knows how to do that, but she'd rather do some other thing. The Alcorn State University Golden Girls. I mean, I don't think you can mention Majorette dance without speaking of them as the sort of originators. Majorette dance has its own sort of vocabularies, and part of what dancers do in majorette dance often is this thing called bucking, and bucking is just popping really hard and kind of like, yeah, just like really strong, powerful, big, audacious, loud movement. Some who are looking with the wrong sort of eyes or vantage could even consider it vulgar, but it's not. It's just like, because it's vulgar depending on how you like ethically moralize movement, and how you, if you think about movement as some sort of sure idea of some sort of ethical indication. So if that's how you read movement, that's happening on its own terms, sure, it could be vulgar, but it's this really just bold movement. And they're known for that, as well as the Jackson State France and J sets of Jackson State University. So I feel like those four are probably the four that I watch the most, but I mean, I'll watch them all, like
Yeah.
Texas Southern Motion, Alabama A&M Divas, Grambling State Orchesis Dance Company. I try to keep up with as many as possible, but I do tend to focus on the France and J sets, the Sensational Stingettes, the Fabulous Dancing Dolls, and the Alcorn State University Golden Girls the most.
I love that. And I just wanted to give you that space to kind of list some of your favorites, because I know giving a shout out to all these teams, I feel like is really super important whenever you're talking about research like this, just being like, I researched this. This is my area of expertise. These are the people that I follow the closest, and just kind of have that list in mind for the listeners out there so that they can go and find the best stuff, I love it. I want to know more about the categories of majorette dance too. There's the strut, the stands, and the field show. Tell me a little bit about what we can expect to see if we were to like go to a game at an HBCU and see one of these teams.
Yeah, sure. So the strut is sort of like the procession into or out of anywhere. So the sort of long ritual of majorette dance, or how each game sort of works, is that the strut is the beginning, and that's when the band is playing, or the drums are just kind of like playing a sort of cadence, and the women have these different walks that they do, and they're these really strong, actually the best metaphor for these walks, and as she's been influenced by majorette dance, is probably just watching Beyonce sort of command a sort of strut. It's this really grand, arrogant, strong movement forward.
Yeah.
I talk about it using some words from Zora Neale Hurston when she speaks of the drama sometimes of Black expressive cultures in the feminine domain, and she speaks of this woman turning her corner, and she says that she's walking like she knows I'm a darn sweet woman, and you know it too. And I feel like that's what the walk sort of has, this sort of command of being, like a presence. It's an announcement of like being here. So that's the strut. But within this strut, sometimes you'll have these 8 count or 16 count sort of dance movements, but it's basically just a procession into the stadium, a procession onto the field, off of the field, out of the stadium. You see it in parade culture, but this is kind of sort of how they move. How do they get from here to there? As one dancer remarked on this show, which everyone should check out on ESPN Plus, Why Not Us? It focuses on the Southern University Fabulous Dolls. But as she said, the marching band, the band marches, we strut. So it's kind of like that's how they get from point A to point B. It's through a strut, and it's just
that's so really cool,
beautiful, bold movement.
That is so cool. I'm just picturing like a Beyonce show as well. Like you have names like Megan Thee Stallion, Beyonce, they pop up in your writing. Mm-hmm. Is this a common thing where you're seeing majorette dance teams influencing and inspiring some of the biggest stars in the music industry today?
Absolutely. I mean, even from the uniforms, the sort of idea of like the leotard as enough, and the leotard or the unitard, and how that is a trend within like pop performances, especially Black performances. But Beyonce is doing majorette dance in 2008 in Single Ladies, and she's gracing MTV stages in 2009, literally doing the sort of structures that majorette dance sets up in another category that you mentioned called the stands. And that's actually, just to move into that, the stands are which is another category of majorette dance. It's where the dancers are sort of bannered in front of the band in some sort of configuration with the head in the front and the dancers behind her. And in this configuration, the lead or the captain that's in the front will do an 8 count or a 16 count pre-rehearsed sort of counts. And I don't say pre-rehearsed in that like they're rehearsed for that song. They usually have a catalog of about 70 to 100, 8 to 16 counts, so they have to just hold in their memory. When the lead does one of those, they have to then follow that leader and they all do it together. Or they do different versions of the women behind the leader standing up and dancing together in unison once the leader has sort of demonstrated or danced out what they should be picking up. So it's this really interesting movement structure where like, it's like very call and response. I'm going to do this dance first, and then the core behind me has to repeat it. And I mentioned this in lieu of Beyonce because she actually does this in her MTV VMA performance of Single Ladies. She does it in the video as well, where she does this 8 count first, and then the girls behind her do the 8 count with her. These are called catch-ons, and they're very signature to the majorette style of dance, especially in the stands. So we see that there, but then also Megan Thee Stallion, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, did an Apple TV performance, special performance, where she danced in the stands. She danced in bleachers and had the same sort of setup, and she led in the same ways that these majorette dancers lead. You know, it's the same exact structure. So we see it again there with her. But it's all over. It's I think we see it everywhere. I think it's been hiding in plain sight. I kind of love that.
Yeah.
That we're all familiar with something that we're not familiar with, but we know it because we've been seeing it for so long. We just attributed it to these pop stars. And so that's why when Beyonce has this whole Coachella moment, it's beautiful to see that she's showing some of the influences on her work. And then also we have to remember, like, Beyonce is from Texas. Megan Thee Stallion is from Texas. Part of what I also want to demonstrate through the work is for Black Southern life, this is just a part of the life. Like it's part of the life. We all know we're all watching this happen and fold out in front of us if we're central to it or proximate to it.
I love it. And, watching the stands videos is really interesting too, because the way that the dancers almost take turns where one will stand up and dance, and then the others will sit in a very specific posture with a very specific appearance. And then another one will stand up and dance. Like they take turns, but there's this really interesting posture and seated position. What is the importance of the ways that they take turns, and then the importance of posture between dance turns, essentially?
Yeah, I like this question because this is something that I'm figuring out as well. One thing that's happening, in my opinion, or what I gather, is that we're learning something about the spectrums of like Black Southern ideas of civility, and the range a bit of it, and the intention. And so when I see the women sit, like particularly the Southern University Dancing Dolls, because they have, among all the other teams, many teams sit with their legs together, maybe with their ankles crossed, with their hands on their lap. Like they sit sort of with this in some sort of style of like an etiquette class 101. They're smiling, they're sitting. It's very much it's almost robotic, mannequin-like in its presentation. But the Southern University Dancing Dolls, this is part of the reason why I love them so much, because like everything about them is like nuanced, and it's like aloof and flirtatious, and just like I don't know, it's like Febreze. It's just like this breath of fresh air the entire time. So they sit with their legs crossed, and then as they're sitting, a lot of the time you'll see them sort of like roll their hair back, where it's like, your hair wasn't in your face. That's just a quiet serve. That's just a gesture to let people know that you're present, and that you know that the eyes are on you. So like their sit is so interesting to me because it's they're still dancing, whereas in my opinion, they're still dancing. Whereas in a lot of the other groups, it's really, I think, of their time to kind of be at rest, but also present this idea of like the model citizen with the best etiquette, just in case potentially that the moves distract you from the fact that like, this is not who I am, this is what I can do and what I'm doing. So I don't know, I feel like it's this weird interesting conversation about embodiment being about more about the drama, as maybe Zora Neale Hurston would say, than it is about like getting some true idea of the individual. It's a performance. And I think that like the sitting for me always reminds me of like, in case you're getting lost in the movement, this can remind you that this is completely performative.
Interesting. Okay. You just mentioned the name Zora Neale Hurston. Zora Neale Hurston's work shows up a lot in your writing. And I'm just curious about your interest in the work of Zora Neale Hurston and how it connects to what it is that you do and on your, in the vision of your own work.
I believe more than anything, the reason why I've been so drawn to Zora Neale Hurston is that I think she does things on her terms, and I find that incredibly attractive. But more than that, I think she doesn't try to make the work meet some sort of idea of what people imagine the work should be. So I feel like she meets the work on its own terms and doesn't shy away from that. And I think that if you're studying Black expressive cultures as she did, as I am doing, I think it's important to have that sort of openness and be receptive to the work in that way, to the case studies in that way, to these people in ways that you're not trying to sanitize it or make it clinical. But also she does this really beautiful thing that Audra Simpson later coins, like ethnographic refusal, where she gives it to you, but doesn't give it all away. And I love that ethic, and I try to abide by that. And she also uses language to me that doesn't try to get above its people, above its citizens, above its subjects. And I appreciate that as well. Like, to be both rigorous and clear is really important to me. And I think she does that. So I use her because I want to like foreground my work with as much Black people, Black women, Black feminists as possible, but also because she, to me, is such a beautiful example of do this your way and being rigorous is not being unclear.
As I mentioned earlier, I dove so deeply into this in YouTube, but also in TikTok. And the online culture of Majorette dance is absolutely amazing. I was watching performances from Alcorn State, Southern University, JSU, and these videos have tens of thousands of views on YouTube, millions of views on TikTok. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about the online presence of these dance teams and also the online community that follows these videos out there.
Oh, the online community is vast. It's huge. But it's also a thing like if you know, which I love about it. But I don't know. I've been able to be in contact with so many different people just from our love of Majorette dance. So just speaking to community, there are Facebook groups that I'm now a part of, where it's just a bunch of mostly Black queer men obsessing over their love for Majorette dance.
Yeah.
I consider one person the guru. His name is Morgan Williams, who created the Facebook group, who like does reaction videos that have a very loyal and large following. He has so much actually that has informed my work. I'm so grateful for the work that he does. But he's created a whole community of people who follow him and work with him and respond to him. He has interviews with these Majorette dancers. That's just speaking to the community. I have watched people meet each other in Instagram lives through Majorette dance, and then they start doing performances with each other. The Black queer presence, the Black queer response to Majorette dance is sort of like alarming and gorgeous and beautiful. There's so much community there in that space alone. But I think that people are also communing through the dance itself. So like, there have been many a TikTok challenge, especially in the past year or two, where Majorette dance has been the trend, even unbeknownst to many of the people who are like doing the challenge. It's everywhere. And for a person like me who's been in this, I've been into online Majorette culture. I would say online probably since like 2013, when I realized like, oh, people are recording these videos and I can watch these videos since I'm no longer in the South, because I wasn't in the South at that time. I was in New York and New England.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It was like a homesickness thing. You were kind of like connecting with home.
Actually, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I didn't Yeah, I remember one day there was this guy who went to FAMU and he posted this video of the Fabulous Dancing Dolls. And I was like, oh, wait, there's a YouTube following for this? Because I just hadn't seen it in a while. And then I went to the video that he highlighted, and then I saw like, oh my word, like they've been chronicling this. And so it became a pastime. I don't want to do some work. I'm kind of bored. I want to just sit and watch something cool. I'm going to put on these videos. And so, yeah, it kind of resurged later in my life after being away from it for so long.
That is amazing. Well, Dustin, I want to talk a little bit about the program that you're going through right now with the Sacred Rights program funded by the Luce Foundation for a project called, there's a massive project going on this year that they're doing. And I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about your involvement with Sacred Rights so far and how that involvement is going for you.
Yeah, I was very honored to be selected to be a part of this program. It's been going great. It's also, I think more than anything, it's kind of demonstrated to me, like part of the reason why you've been afraid to to be public with your scholarship is because it's mostly just fear. And one of the things that they mentioned throughout the program is this idea of like risk, rewards, and responsibilities. And now I'm a Virgo, so rewards don't really, I mean, sure, I'm excited to get them, but I don't think much about rewards. I do, however, think about risk and responsibility all the time. And part of what this has been helpful for me with is like sharing with a group of people who like are giving me positive feedback so that I don't fear what I'm risking or the responsibilities. And I feel like my risk and responsibilities lay on the same plane, which is I am an expert on Majorette dance within the academy, right? Like, so I
Yes.
know a lot about it compared to, I think, probably anyone in the academy that I know and people I do not know, I probably would be the expert in that field. However, I follow people who I know who know much more than me. For example, Morgan Williams. And whenever I think about this work, I think about like, what would he think of what I'm saying? Because like, sure, I am the expert here, but there are greater experts who are, you know, who are outside of the field of academy. So I think what it's taught me is that I have to be okay with trusting myself as an expert and moving forward in the ways that I can, even though there are others who may know more than me. I think I have this fear of like messing up. And I think that Sacred Rights has prepared me in many ways to move past that
Mm-hmm.
and be able to talk about these things with confidence, knowing that even if I don't know everything, I know enough, and I'm knowledgeable in this area. So I'm very
Yeah.
thankful for that.
What are some of your goals for getting your work and knowledge into the public sphere so more people like me who aren't in the academy can learn from what it is that you're interested in?
So I would love to write in the public sphere. I don't really want to have sort of a social media persona, but I would love to be a writer for different publications that are seen by more than just academics. My vision is huge. I could see myself writing for the Guardian. I could see myself writing for the New York Times, the New Yorker. I hope that within my journey, I am able to add more commentary about Black Southern life. I As a child, I think that's part of the reason why like I left and went to Howard and make sure I went to DC to get out of the South. I grew up being a bit embarrassed about being Southern. I would try to like hide my accent. That's even when I was living in Mobile, because of this idea of Southerners not being as intelligent or something. And so I always tried to run away from that. And I find now I am running full speed ahead towards it. And I want to sort of spend some time thinking through what it means to be Black and Southern, because I don't think that's a topic that is discussed enough or thought through enough. I feel like our vision of Black Southernness is somehow always tracked back to the civil rights movement somehow. And sure, but also there's more to know about Black Southern life and Black Southern expressive cultures. And I hope that I allow myself the opportunity to speak about it with a larger audience.
Amazing. Well, Dustin, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. Your work is really fascinating to me. I've never highlighted any dance on the podcast in the 6 years that I've been doing this. So this is an absolutely wonderful addition to the many amazing conversations that I've gotten to have over the course of the last several years. Where can people find you if they want to follow your work or see what it is that you get up to in the coming years?
I will just say for now, a website coming soon.
Perfect.
Website coming soon, but you will start seeing much more of my work in the near future, I'm sure.
Wonderful. Well, Dustin Gavin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast to talk about your work, your interest in research in Majorette dance, your work that you are currently doing with the Sacred Rites 2023 cohort. It's been a real pleasure having you on, and I'm so grateful to you for your time and energy.
Thank you so much, Greg, for having me. It was a pleasure indeed. Thank you.